leading the charge for a new international system to address the three products that are at the heart of the climate crisis: coal, oil, and gas. This is the 28th Conference of the Parties of the UNFCCC, the 28th year that the world has come together to agree on the path forward for humanity in addressing climate change. We've made dramatic progress within the UNFCCC in this time, including setting the guiding star of the 1.5 degree temperature goal that we now all strive for. But unfortunately, we are way off track in meeting that goal. Coal, oil, and gas still account for 82% of total primary energy worldwide, and it is responsible for 86% of carbon in the atmosphere. Emissions are continuing to rise. The value of these negotiations every year is not just the rules that we write for humanity and ourselves under the framework of the UNFCCC. It is also that it brings the world together every year. The leading thinkers and our global leaders come together to discuss all facets of the climate challenge and what we can do to solve it. It is therefore appropriate that today we are here to discuss a bold, exciting, and much-needed new proposal for a new treaty that would complement and sit alongside the Paris Agreement by addressing the root cause of the climate crisis: fossil fuels. As we'll hear from our speakers, the proposed Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty will be grounded in equity and a just transition for all. We are honored and thrilled to be joined today by a lineup of speakers who are at the forefront of global climate leadership. We'll be hearing from the Honorable Kauseo Natano, Prime Minister of Tuvalu, His Excellency Gustavo Petro, President of Colombia, His Excellency Jose Ramos Horta, President of Timor-Leste, the Honorable Gaston Brown, Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, the Honorable Ralph Regenvanu, Minister of Climate Change, Energy, Meteorology, Geohazards and Disaster Management for Vanuatu, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General of the World Health Organization, Archbishop Chong, Catholic Archbishop of Suva, Fiji, Alina Shehia Shawit, who is the President of the Regional Coordinator of Indigenous Peoples, and Dr. Sephora Berman, Chair of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. We will hear from our distinguished country representatives first, then our distinguished experts. So without further ado, and I do apologize for the delay that we've had this afternoon, I have great pleasure in inviting Honorable Prime Minister Kauseo Natano of Tuvalu to provide his welcoming remarks. Alongside Vanuatu, Tuvalu has been leading the charge on the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty proposal for a year. Prime Minister, you inspired many around the world with your speech at last year's COP. Could you please tell us what this proposal means for Tuvalu and why you're inviting other countries to support it? Please.
Distinguished delegates, excellencies, friends, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the governments of Tuvalu and Vanuatu, I thank you for honoring us with your presence at this important discussion. We are particularly honored to welcome the distinguished heads of governments who are present today. Talofa and warm Pacific greetings to you all. Friends, every year, our countries travel for days to attend COP, and we spent the majority of the previous years preparing for these negotiations. Our needs and interests in relation to climate change inform all our policy and political decisions and underpins our engagement regionally and internationally. Climate change is the single greatest threat to humanity. And yet, every year, we find ourselves debating the same issues and fighting the same battles. The science is clear. The IPCC and other agencies are clear. In order to keep 1.5 alive, we must take urgent action to reduce fossil fuel production. And the longer we take, the more drastic those actions need to be. The Pacific and SIDS live on the front line of climate change with worsening climate disasters. Changing weather patterns and rising sea levels, and have continued to call on the world to take necessary action to urgently reduce emissions. Today, on behalf of the people of Tuvalu, I come to deliver a simple message to save our people from the devastating impacts of climate change. This COP28 must produce a decision which addresses the root cause of emissions. At this COP, we must see a decision that includes clear language on phasing out fossil fuels. We no longer have time to sit by while our islands sink, while our forests burn, and while our people suffer. We know what is driving climate change, and we know what is needed to stop it. The Paris Agreement establishes the regime of nationally determined contributions, allowing countries to chart their own path forward to reduce global emissions. But as the science shows us, this is simply not enough. With the current level of commitment, we will overshoot 1.5 degrees, and that is a fact that we should all reckon with. The simple fact remains, we cannot lower emissions if we keep growing the problem, and that is why Tuvalu, Vanuatu, and the other countries are gathering today to announce that we are mobilizing international cooperation to begin negotiating a Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. At present, the phase-out of fossil fuels is largely unmanaged. We must take steps to begin internationally monitoring and managing this phase-out to ensure a just and equitable transition. Anything less than that means we breach the 1.5 degree, and atoll nations such as mine become inundated and uninhabitable. For Tuvalu and many nations of the Pacific, that is an unacceptable reality. Many will think this is to be an impossible task, that it is either too ambitious or too late. But let me remind you of the many impossible achievements we have already accomplished. We have the Marshall Islands to thank for spearheading this from its earliest days and for bringing nations together in the high ambition coalition that eventually secured the 1.5 goal in the Paris Agreement. The ICJ advisory opinion, when students initially proposed this, they were laughed out of the room by many. But then Vanuatu saw its importance, the precedents it would set, the level of ambition it would raise. 3 years later, the resolution is now passed by consensus in the UN General Assembly and is now before the International Court of Justice. The natural next step is to look at how the international system can tackle the problem of fossil fuels. This is where the proposal for a Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty and the suite of just transition initiatives in the Port Vila Call come in to begin addressing fossil fuel production for the first time. If history has taught us anything, it's that significant challenges can only be overcome by significant, sometimes unlikely, solutions. We in the Pacific have done this before. This is not a new thing to us. The choice of either being ambitious or being realistic is a false choice. We must choose to be both if we are to repeat those area victories. Myself and my fellow leaders gathered on the stage today are committed to a future where our children and grandchildren do not live in the shadow of climate change, but where they thrive in a global community, committed to preserving our peoples and our planet. To our delegations and negotiators, may you find the strength you need to persevere for the outcomes we need that will protect the lives and livelihoods of our present and future generations. I thank you. Vanuatu and Tuvalu.
Thank you, Honourable Prime Minister, for your exemplary climate leadership. We were due to have His Excellency Jose Ramos-Hortas, President of Timor-Leste, to speak next. Unfortunately, he's been taken unwell, but he has left us a quote, which I would like to share with you now. And he says, "As a country dependent on oil and gas development, we know that international cooperation is a sine qua non condition for making a global energy transition possible, even more so if it is to be just. To make this possible requires predictable, considerable financial support from richer nations that benefited the most from decades of coal, oil, and gas extraction. It is time for them to join our growing group of nation states, committing to develop a plan to end the era of fossil fuels. Anything less are crocodile tears." So we thank him for that and wish him well. I would then like to call and invite Honourable Gaston Brown, Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda. Prime Minister, Antigua and Barbuda is the first Caribbean nation to join the call for a fossil fuel treaty. You've already taken a number of decisive steps to accelerate global climate action, such as the establishment of the Commission on Small Island States on Climate Change and International Law. And why do you think negotiating a new treaty is important for Antigua and Barbuda and the region? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as Prime Minister of one of the most vulnerable small island states globally, this message is very clear. We are at a crossroad in history and facing a monumental choice that will define the trajectory of our planet: the call for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. This treaty is imperative and monumental because of the seismic shift it promises in our pursuit of a cleaner future. And I'll add here that if, as a consequence of all of our voluntary efforts, we're unable to protect that 1.5 degree threshold, if there's going to be an overshoot, then perhaps a future discussion will be around legal action to hold large polluters accountable. Because the reality is they continue to game the system, and whereas they have made many pledges, we have seen inaction in many instances, and I believe that perhaps in the future they may have to be complementary legal action, and even having all stakeholders holding political leaders globally accountable for their climate inaction. But certainly this treaty is extremely important. And Antigua and Barbuda fully endorses the proposal for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty because of the urgency embedded in our battle against climate change. It is a clarion call to acknowledge that the unchecked proliferation of fossil fuels poses an existential threat to humanity, transcending borders, demanding a collective global response. So in essence, we need an all-of-society response, holding each individual responsible, especially our leaders. Consider the devastating consequences etched into the very molecules of carbon emissions. The rising temperatures, the melting ice caps, the wildfires that range with unprecedented ferocity, the intense tropical cyclones that ravages our islands year after year, and the decade-long drought that my country faces at this time. We are not merely witnessing the side effects of an industrial age. We are confronting the sobering reality of a planet in peril, literally a planet on fire, a planet that these large polluters are literally burning to the ground. This treaty is not an indictment of progress. Rather, it is an acknowledgement that our current trajectory is unsustainable. And therefore, we must act, and act now. And we have to be unrelenting in our actions. It challenges us to reimagine our energy landscape, to transition from the shackles of dependency on finite resources towards a future powered by renewables and sustainable alternatives. It is a commitment to break free from the fossil fuel addiction that has fueled our economies at the expense of the environment. And we cannot continue to sustain a global culture in which profits are actually given priority over people and our planet. It must be people and planet first. Now, in these pivotal moments, let us recognize the moral imperative embedded in the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. It is a pact that seeks to protect the most vulnerable among us, those who bear the brunt of climate change, despite contributing least to its causes. It is a promise to future generations that we will not bequeath them a planet shackled by the chains of our short-sighted decisions and our greed and indiscipline. The road to a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty will not be an easy one. It will be fraught with challenges and certainly vested interests. But we must fight those vested interests unrelentingly, because ultimately protecting the planet is in the best interest of all. However, the cost of inaction far outweighs the challenges of transformation. We must summon the collective will to confront powerful industries and forge a new paradigm, one that values sustainability over expediency and profits. Let us remember that the urgency of climate action demands unprecedented courage. So we have to be very courageous in this fight. We're doing it not only for ourselves, but for future generations. The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is our opportunity to be on the right side of history. And I say to you that we are indeed on the right side of history. Let us be remembered as the generation that chose the health of our planet over the convenience of the status quo, and certainly profits, which have taken precedence over people and our planet. I will continue to be a champion for this treaty, and I encourage everyone to use every opportunity to raise awareness for this treaty at COP28 and beyond. And I certainly want to commend my colleague Prime Minister of Tuvalu for his commitment. We are also fighting in another forum, ITLAS, in which we have asked for an advisory opinion to determine whether or not state parties are meeting their obligations to protect our marine environment. We are absolutely confident that they are violating, that they are polluting our seas with their CO2 emissions. As a consequence, we had a hearing in Hamburg a couple of months ago, and we should have a decision on that advisory opinion probably April of next year, which we believe will be a positive one and will certainly set a foundation for future action to hold these large polluters accountable, and ultimately to protect our planet and all of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Brown, for your words and your commitment to the treaty. I would now like to ask Honourable Minister Stephen Victor from Palau. We're delighted that Palau is the 9th country that has endorsed the treaty. Yes, big round of applause. This happened just yesterday, so I'm delighted to ask Minister Stephen Victor to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator, and good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We will soon celebrate 10 years of the Paris Agreement. And what is clear is that 86% of fossil fuel contribute to climate change. What is clear is that the global stock date indicate that we are overshooting 1.5 degrees Celsius and heading to 3 degrees. What is clear is that ambitions have not been enough. What is clear is there has been no accountability. What is clear is there been no political will. What is clear to us is our moral responsibility to give to our children a livable world. And what is clear is that we must do something now, not tomorrow, not at the next COP29. So Palau is happy to have joined our brothers from Tuvalu, Vanuatu in the Pacific, with a growing list of countries who are calling for this non-proliferation fossil fuel treaty. As it's been mentioned, it's going to be a hard road ahead, but it is a responsibility that we as leaders today must take. It is the decision that is at our fingertip that we must decide. We can no longer wait for higher ambitions, but we must take on this hard responsibility to ensure that we give to the future generations a better world than we have today. Thank you.
We really appreciate your climate action. Thank you very much, Minister Victor. We're privileged to have some experts with us who will be joined and will give us why they think the treaty is a critical next step for global climate cooperation. We're delighted to have the Director General, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus of the World Health Organization. Dr. Tedros is a man who's been steadfast and courageous in protecting global health at a time of intersecting crises. And under his leadership, the World Health Organization became the first UN institution to endorse the call for a Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Thank you, Dr. Tedros.
Thank you, Moderator. Your Excellency President Petro, Honorable Prime Minister Natano, and Honorable Prime Minister Brown, Ministers, Archbishop Chong, and President Burma, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, and dear friends. Good afternoon. Maybe I better start by saying Bolovinaga. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Tuvalu and Vanuatu for organizing this important event and for extending their kind invitation to me. During my visit to Tuvalu in 2019, already 4 years ago, I had the privilege of meeting a remarkable young boy named Falu. Maybe I will show you Falu's picture. May not be clear, but that's Falu and me. I don't know if you can see anything. Yeah? And that's with his father from Tuvalu. He shared with me the conversations he had with his friends about the potential sinking of Tuvalu and the uncertain future they faced. Some of his friends contemplated leaving the island in case Tuvalu sinks. Some of his friends contemplated leaving the island. They were actually specific, seeking refuge in Fiji. So while others expressed their willingness to stay and sink with their beloved homeland. These are 13, 12, 11 years old children who are saying this. Falu's words deeply affected me, serving as a poignant reminder of the challenges faced by children in the Pacific. Children should be children. I would have loved if he was laughing and playing and being a child, but he wasn't. They worry about the survival of their island homes due to the emissions produced by distant nations. This reality weighs heavily on their young shoulders. Imagine our children carrying this heavy weight on their shoulders, highlighting the profound impact our actions or lack thereof have on the lives of the most vulnerable. Addressing climate change necessitates addressing the role of fossil fuels. Much like we cannot discuss lung cancer without acknowledging the impact of tobacco. It's undeniable that over 75%, I heard today higher figure even, more than 80, of greenhouse gas emissions stem from oil, coal, and gas, which not only harm our planet, but also pose a grave threat to human health. Some people tell me, why do you say fossil fuel? Because fossil fuel is one of the contributors to the emission. And why don't you say just emission, carbon emission? Then I say to them, when carbon fuel, that's oil, gas, natural gas, and coal combined contributes more than 75%, why can't we name that major contributor? Why do we combine it with the rest? If you combine it, where do you focus? But if you identify it, you know where to focus, because it's more than 75%, even if I take the conservative image. And without addressing this 75% or 80%, achieving the 1.5 degree centigrade limit is a balloony. It doesn't happen. It will not happen. It will not happen. And as Prime Minister Natano said, debating the same issue, this issue which is obvious, and fighting the same battle, we just stay the same place. We don't move even an inch. And like what he said, I agree, this has to stop. This has to stop, and we should make progress because the science is there, the evidence is clear. It's clear. And not only we know the problem, we know also the solutions. And the solution is also clear, as the Minister of Palau said. The devastating effects of air pollution resulting from these emissions claim the lives of over 7 million people each year. In full support of your call for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, the World Health Organization stands united with you. And as Prime Minister Brown said, I will continue to champion, and the whole organization for that matter. And we are joined by nearly 50 million health workers represented by various organizations advocating for robust climate action, including the phasing out of use of fossil fuels. So in the health sector, you have already 50 million champions. The objectives outlined in the proposed treaty are clear, evidence-based, and equitable. A rapid phase-out of fossil fuels is imperative to safeguard island nations, preserve the integrity of our planet, and protect the health and well-being of all. Again, I extend my deepest appreciation for your unwavering leadership, to my leaders here, and continued commitment to this vital cause. We have a duty to protect the homes and health of children like Falu and his friends. Please, let's allow them to be children. Thank you all for your tireless efforts in addressing this critical issue. Together, we can create a sustainable future that ensures the well-being of future generations. So let's move in a way that doesn't have any regret, to do everything that we can. And the treaty is the best that we have. And let's make it happen, and the actions should also follow. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tedros, for humanizing this effort, and we really appreciate your words. Next, I'd like to welcome to the stage His Grace, Archbishop Chong. Archbishop Chong continues to remind the world of the vulnerabilities of communities impacted by climate change and for the restoration of ecological relationships. This is particularly powerful following His Holiness the Pope's statement at the plenary today on eliminating fossil fuels. At a time when political expediency has shifted the conversation to resilience, this is especially important. Thank you, and please welcome Your Grace.
Who am I? I am the Remba, the Gosh Hawk. I am the Yasi, the sandalwood tree. I am the Yawa, the milkfish. Dear friends, those are three things that define me as a Fijian. My bird, my totem tree, and my fish, which is the milkfish. These three totems define who I am, and for many Pacific Islanders, define our relationship with the land, creation, and the ocean, or the moana, or in Fijian, the waitui. And life for many Pacific Islanders is defined by that relationship of the land, the ocean, and creation. My mother told me that when I was born, she buried my umbilical cord with a taro plant because we were taro farmers. to show that cord, the cord that gave life, connected me to life, is now planted in a bigger mother, and that is the earth. And so that also holds the hope that, you know, when I plant taro, that the taro will bear good fruit. Also common among Pacific Islanders is the notion of the vanua, the whenua in the Maori, the hanua, the fonua. All these depict one's relationship with the land and the ocean. And so in Maori, they've defined themselves, the river is me and I am the river. Dear friends, the call to eliminate fossil fuels is good news for island people whose lives are grounded in a relationship with earth, the sea, and plants. Ending fossil fuel is good news because it protects the very existence and identity and dignity of Pacific Islanders whose lives are based on this relationship with land, the ocean, and birds and animals. And so I want to thank all the Pacific Island leaders that have adopted this fossil fuel-free world that we are standing by today. Fossil fuel-free world means a lot to the islanders. It protects our identity, our very existence. And if we don't do this, then we might not as well. It deprives us of our dignity and existence and who we are. And so I want to thank our Pacific Island leaders, thank the Honorable President of Tuvalu for hosting this, and I pray that God will bless this very important work that we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Chong. Next, I'm delighted to ask Elina Shian Shawit to the stage. Elina is a leader of the Awahun people. She has worked to defend the rights of indigenous women and people and against threats to their land. Welcome, Elina.
Bien, buenas tardes con todos y todas. Mi nombre es Elaine Shahian Shavit, yo soy del pueblo Awahun de Perú. Estoy acá, soy de un pueblo indígena, amazónico, peruana, trayendo las voces de los pueblos indígenas. Estoy acá para que el mundo entero sepa nuestra problemática de nuestro país. Y estoy acá uniéndome en la defensa de la Amazonía peruana. En ello, los pueblos indígenas apoyan al tratado la no proliferación de los combustibles fósiles a raíz de los 40 años de explotación petrolera en sus territorios. Los pueblos indígenas cada vez pobres, cada vez desnutrición crónica, metales pesados, persecución a los líderes, defensores y defensoras, nuevas concesiones petroleras que viene amenazando a los territorios de los pueblos indígenas. Más de 40 años de explotación petrolera, los pueblos indígenas de la Amazonía peruana estamos amenazados cada vez más, perseguidos por defender, por reclamar nuestro justo derecho. Tenemos nuestros territorios contaminados de hidrocarburos, nuestras cochas, nuestros ríos, nuestro medio ambiente. Es por eso Estoy acá trayendo las voces de los pueblos indígenas, de las 9 nacionalidades que han apoyado al tratado, la no proliferación de los combustibles fósiles en nuestros territorios. Hago un llamado a los presidentes de los diferentes países que se unan todos los países en la defensa de la Amazonía. Igual, defendamos también la vía de los pueblos indígenas, porque los petróleos están en los territorios de los pueblos indígenas en la Amazonía. Y hoy, más que nunca, pedimos a todo el mundo entero que sepan que los pueblos indígenas no obstruyen el desarrollo, sino piden que se respete sus derechos, que se respete sus bosques, su territorio, porque esa es vida. Nosotros defendemos, cuidamos nuestros bosques, nuestro territorio, y así como cuidamos, también pedimos al mundo entero que nos ayuden a difundir que por favor ya no más explotación petrolera en los territorios de los pueblos indígenas, ya no más financiamientos para estas empresas que vienen atentando los derechos de los pueblos indígenas, ya no más concesiones, y que los estados, los presidentes se unan. Felicitaciones a todos los presidentes que están impulsando este tratado, apoyando a este tratado, porque también ellos tienen sus hijos, igual que nosotros como pueblos indígenas, que estamos preocupados. En ello agradezco este espacio de invitación para venir, traer las voces de los pueblos indígenas. Muchas gracias, hermanos. Sí, Kwashat.
Thank you, Elena. Next, we have Sephora, who is the chair of our Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty initiative. Sephora has worked tirelessly and bravely on the issue of fossil fuel phase-out and has been an inspiration to many, and I'm sure to all of us in this room. Thank you, Sephora.
Honorable Prime Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished guests, I'm honored to be a part of this historic moment. When the Paris Agreement was reached, I missed it, even though I've been to, I think, 15 COPs, because I was deep in domestic issues, working in Alberta, Canada, trying to develop climate policy in the oil sands. That experience made me realize that even with strong climate leadership in government, it was so difficult for any one country to constrain the expansion of fossil fuel production on their own. And that many countries and companies know that we will and have to use less fossil fuels in the futures, but they all want to be the last barrel sold. That's why this moment and the leadership from the first 10 nation states to call for a fossil fuel treaty is so critical. We need international cooperation to manage a global wind down of fossil fuels and to fast-track electrification and renewables. At this moment in history, it's a scandal that oil, gas, and coal production planned by just 10 high-income countries alone would already exceed 1.5-degree consistent pathways for each fossil fuel by 2040. Let's be clear. It's not a transition if countries continue to grow the problem. After 30 years, fossil fuels have finally been dragged center stage in the climate negotiations, but even if this COP successfully calls for a phase-out of fossil fuels, we're still left with the question of how we wind down production in an equitable and planned manner that leaves no one behind. The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty will complement and help to implement the Paris Agreement. It builds on the historic successes of other international regimes that have sought to address the problem of oversupply of harmful substances. Examples include the recent Nuclear Ban Treaty, the Landmine Ban Treaty, the Montreal Protocol on ozone-depleting substances, and the WHO Convention on Tobacco Control. What these examples all have in common is a group of pioneering countries backed by a global community of experts committed to working together towards new international governance. Today, here, we're seeing the start of that pioneering group of governments towards the Fossil Fuel Treaty proposal. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership, for your courage, and for your vision. Thank you to Palau, who called for the Fossil Fuel Treaty on the floor of the high-level dialogue yesterday, becoming the 9th country, and today to Colombia, becoming the 10th. So where to from here? The next phase of work involves continuing to build on the exciting momentum we've seen today and expanding the pioneering group of countries to include a truly diverse and representative mix of geographies, economic circumstances, and levels of dependence on fossil fuels. As the group expands, the participating nations will also begin to engage their lawyers and international law experts to help identify the most appropriate venues for negotiations to take place, and starting to identify options for what the key provisions of a fossil fuel treaty could look like, ready to take to the negotiating table. This includes options for the operational provisions governing the end of expansion and phase out of fossil fuel production, possible connections to trade and tax agreements that might offer either incentives or barriers to countries party to the treaty, and financial mechanisms and new areas of collaboration to ensure a just and equitable and financed transition. Those who engage now have a unique opportunity to shape the future. Countries that join the process early on will play a pivotal role in designing the parameters of the new treaty and the relevant processes from the ground floor. Their insights will be the foundation, steering the development of a framework that respects the nuances of each nation's circumstances. For countries like Colombia and Timor-Leste, whose economies are tied to fossil fuels, their involvement is crucial in ensuring that the transition is not only environmentally sound, but also economically viable and just. Likewise, nations such as Tuvalu, Vanuatu, and Antigua and Barbuda that are some of the most vulnerable to climate change and heavily reliant on fossil fuels for their energy needs offer a key perspective that we must not only work to end fossil fuel expansion and manage a wind down of production, but we must develop new areas of international cooperation to fast-track access to solutions to wind down fossil fuel use. This is a pivotal moment in history that demands bold action. The fossil fuel industry has operated in the shadows for far too long, obscuring itself and its products in climate negotiations and policy discussions. But that ends now. Some say a new treaty is too bold, that it's too big of a new idea. But we know, especially after this year of breaking records, that we cannot afford more of the same. 5 million people this year lost their lives due to lethal heat alone, 7 million from air pollution due to fossil fuels, and the records that we broke this year broke records. For 30 years, we've heard targets and promises of climate action, while countries and companies continue to expand the problem, to drill for more oil, to frack for more gas, to dig up more coal, even though the science is clear that we have to stop expanding production and emissions. What we build today will be what we use tomorrow. This is a big, bold new idea, at a time when the world needs big, bold new ideas. Together, we have the power to chart a pragmatic and actionable pathway that redirects our efforts towards a cleaner and more equitable future. Together, we will design a fossil fuel treaty that will help us meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. It will not be easy. It will take courage, like we've seen today. But the great thing about courage, well, courage is contagious. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zipporah, and for laying out some of the pathways forward. I'm now honored to invite Minister Ralph Regenvanu, Minister of Climate Change, Energy, Environment, Meteorology, Geohazards and Disaster Management of Vanuatu. You've been at the forefront of climate justice leadership for well over a decade. And we're really pleased that Vanuatu was the first country to call for the Fossil Fuel Treaty. We'd love to hear your remarks. Thank you.
Honourable Prime Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished guests, on behalf of Honourable Prime Minister Shalo Salwai and the Government of Vanuatu, I extend my thanks to Honourable Prime Minister Vanuatu and Tuvalu for their continued partnership on this important proposal. Already in the past year alone, the Fossil Fuel Treaty proposal has shifted from a fringe idea to the mainstream. The call for a managed, just, and fair phase-out of fossil fuels is now at the very heart of our discussions now, thanks to your support and the growing number of countries joining this effort. Vanuatu became the first country to endorse the Fossil Fuel Treaty proposal at the UN General Assembly in September last year. Tuvalu joined us at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. Since then, our two governments have worked in partnership to begin building the diplomatic effort to ensure that the 1.5 Paris goal remains alive. Earlier this year, we hosted a ministerial dialogue in Port Vila, Vanuatu, in the aftermath of an unprecedented 2 Category 4 cyclones that battered our islands within 4 days of each other. This meeting resulted in the Port Vila call for a just transition to a fossil fuel-free Pacific, where 6 countries announced an ambitious and broad-ranging plan for a just transition in the Pacific, including support for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Over the past year, our governments have embarked on a program of awareness across the Pacific, with the Port Vila call adopted at 4 regional meetings. And at the UNGA this year, 2 new countries from 2 separate continents joined the ranks of those calling for a treaty, Antigua and Barbuda and Timor-Leste. We were delighted when both these nations joined the call for a fossil fuel treaty during the United Nations General Assembly in September. As fellow small island states, we are showing the world that we punch above our weight when it comes to international climate diplomacy. Welcome to the team. We look forward to working with you all to shape the future and well-being of our planet and the global economy through a just and equitable transition from fossil fuels, and continuing to assemble the squad as more and more nations join with us. And all of this work has been backed by a growing social license across the world for new ambitious governance on fossil fuels. At this juncture, I want to talk about the Global Renewables and Energy Efficiency Pledge, which will be announced today. There is no doubt that a drastic, urgent scale-up of renewable energy is vital. Tripling renewables by 2030 will help establish the energy infrastructure we need for a decarbonized world, improve energy security, and make our planet more resilient. Momentum is growing behind this pledge to triple the world's renewable energy capacity by 2030, and we expect that the pledge will be made today. While we welcome, and Vanuatu has endorsed the pledge, we should not let this distract us from the urgent need to phase out fossil fuels. There is simply far more fossil fuels in the Earth's crust than we can ever burn, and as we deploy renewable energy at a speed and intensity that allows us to supply clean energy to all, it would be unacceptable for fossil fuel producers to respond by continuing to increase production to defend their market share. Peaking emissions before 2025 and nearly halving them by 2030, which the IPCC says is required to stay within the 1.5-degree temperature limit, which the Pacific fought for in Paris, means making all fossil fuel producers uncomfortable. This treaty provides a means to enable international cooperation to phase out fossil fuels. And I want to echo the words of Prime Minister Vanuatu that fossil fuel phase-out must feature in the negotiated outcome of this COP. This is a diplomatic initiative that is country-led, but also has the support of over 3,000 scientists and academics, 101 Nobel laureates, almost 100 subnational governments, the European Parliament, the World Health Organization, as we have heard, and almost 2,500 organizations worldwide. We've heard about other examples of treaty instruments from Tabora. What makes the negotiations for each of these treaties successful was the combination of a group of champion countries, backed by a global network of experts, through thought leaders, faith movements, health movements, indigenous peoples, young peoples, women and gender constituencies, and many more, uniting in the push for new international governance. The Fossil Fuel Treaty proposal is well on the way down this well-trodden path to success. As such, it's my great pleasure to welcome our newest supporter to the stage, a landmark moment in recognizing the importance of international cooperation and support for those countries that are currently dependent on fossil fuels. I now welcome the Honorable Gustavo Petro, President of the Republic of Colombia, a global force for life and a long-standing commitment to peace, justice, and fighting climate change. President Petro, thank you for joining us today.
Gracias. Estuve hace unos 20 días en un lugar de Estados Unidos, San Francisco, en una reunión de la Asociación de Naciones del Pacífico, llamado APEC. Ahí estuvo China, estuvo Rusia, estuvo Estados Unidos, protagonistas centrales de la política y del poder mundial. Estuvo las Islas Fiji, Japón, Vietnam, etcétera, algunos pueblos latinoamericanos como México, como Perú, como Chile y nosotros. Y allí habló el representante de Australia y anunció y lo dijo con mucho boato, llamémoslo así, que estaba dispuesto a recibir los 11,000 habitantes de Tuvalu, de las islas que allí cerca están a punto de hundirse. No de hundirse, sino que el mar se eleva y las va a tapar. Toda su población. Un gesto generoso de Australia, pero que marca una enorme derrota de la humanidad, y así lo dije en ese momento. Porque a pesar de salvar las vidas, indudablemente una cultura va a desaparecer, una nación va a desaparecer. Un etnocidio se llama a la muerte de la cultura. Y esta sería la primera, apenas, de muchas, si las cosas no cambian en el mundo. La muerte de la cultura al final es también la muerte de la humanidad. Aquí en esta mesa están una representación de islas que pueden ser cubiertas por el mar. Habrían otras muchas. Y habrían muchos pueblos al lado del mar, ricos y pobres, que ya estarían ante la contingencia de la reubicación, de irse, que implica de entrada la muerte de las culturas, de las costas del mundo. Allí hay mucha riqueza, allí hay mucha pobreza, pero indudablemente hay mucha cultura, mucha humanidad ya afectada. Esta es la primera línea de la extinción de la vida en el planeta, desde el punto de vista de la humanidad. Por eso no es paradójico el que estemos en un lugar donde se esté sacando petróleo, en esta misma ciudad. Es paradójico en realidad, pero va mostrando una evolución del pensamiento. Algunos nos preguntamos, ¿y por qué un país petrolero, netamente petrolero, y de los grandes países petroleros del mundo, convoca la COP28? Si es que precisamente la ciencia ha dicho a las COPs que es el petróleo, es el carbón, es el gas, es un elemento químico común a todos que se llama carbono, el que en la gran maquinaria industrial de los países más desarrollados del mundo se convierte en los gases de efecto invernadero que producen la crisis climática y por tanto el gran potencial de la sexta extinción sobre el planeta. ¿Por qué? Alguien diría, es una manera de limpiar el petróleo. Hay una tendencia en el mundo hacia ese objetivo. La idea del petróleo, del carbono cero, la idea de petróleo cero, que sobrevive en tanto explotación y en tanto venta del petróleo, pero que quiere equilibrar la carga con otro tipo de ayudas económicas, de emisiones verdes, llamémoslas así, de tasas carbón, etc. Otros pensaríamos que es que el mundo ya se está moviendo y que ya es evidente que no se puede vivir del petróleo y que por tanto países netamente petroleros tienen que hacer una transición dura, pero inteligente y racional hacia cómo vivir sin el petróleo y sin el carbón. También es una paradoja que aquí en esta mesa, donde está la primera línea de los pueblos que pueden desaparecer por la crisis climática, esté un país como el que yo represento, porque nosotros también vivimos del petróleo y del carbón. Y porque en mi país, el simple hecho de que esté sentado en esta mesa, solicitando firmar un tratado de no proliferación de combustibles fósiles en el mundo, que implica cero exploración nueva, que incluso implica cero proyectos de explotación nueva en el mundo, dado que los actuales yacimientos ya encontrados, si se explotan, nos llevarán a una temperatura de 3 grados centígrados, es decir, al borde del colapso vital en el planeta. Allá en mi propia sociedad dirían, ¿cómo se le ocurre al presidente de ese país producir un suicidio económico, dado que nosotros dependemos del petróleo y del carbón? Y resulta que esto no es un suicidio económico. Estar aquí es tratando de detener un suicidio. La palabra exacta es en español omnicidio, la muerte de todo lo vivo, la muerte integral de todo lo existente. El omnicidio es un suicidio a la potencia planetaria. Aquí no es un suicidio económico lo que estamos planteando. Aquí estamos evitando el omnicidio sobre el planeta Tierra. Y para ello, indudablemente, no hay otra fórmula, no hay otro camino. Lo demás son ilusiones. Con el respeto del reverendo, casi decimos en Colombia, poner velas a dioses y diosas que no van a hacer el milagro, como la tecnología, por ejemplo, que no van a hacer el milagro como apariciones milagrosas de alguna técnica que nos pueda salvar, que pueda hacer salvar la existencia sobre el planeta, sino que está en nuestras propias manos la posibilidad de seguir viviendo como civilización humana en este planeta, que a miles o por lo menos hasta donde la investigación nos ha demostrado, es donde solo existe la vida, hasta donde podemos ver a muchos años luz a la distancia, esa vida tan valiosa, como una especie de perla única en un mar del universo, hasta donde podemos entenderlo, la única manera de salvar esa perla, algo tan hermoso como la vida y algo tan hermoso como la expresión inteligente de esa vida que está en nosotros como especie, es suspender el consumo de petróleo, de carbón y de gas. Pareciera fácil, pero sin embargo, la paradoja nos va mostrando cómo alrededor del petróleo, del carbón y del gas hay un poderosísimo interés económico. El mayor interés económico del capitalismo actualmente existente. Y actúa para frenar los cambios. Actúa para mantener, ahí sí de manera suicida, las posibilidades de años más de ganancias que se puedan acumular en los propietarios de ese capital, que actúa de tal manera que está poniendo en peligro la vida por las ganancias, que actúa de tal manera que hoy prácticamente nos estamos enfrentando, no como decían los socialistas del siglo XIX, a una inmensa confrontación antagónica entre el capital y la clase obrera, sino algo peor, que estamos ante una confrontación del capital fósil y la vida humana y la vida del planeta. Y allí hay que tomar posición. Y cualquier ser humano en cualquier parte del mundo sabría que la posición que hay que tomar es al lado de la vida. Y por tanto, como presidente de la República de Colombia, que a pesar que aún vive del petróleo y del carbón y hace esfuerzos por escaparse de él, no me cabe ninguna duda de cuál posición tomar. La posición es al lado de la vida. Y hoy en la humanidad, al lado de la vida, significa al lado de ustedes, los pueblos que en las islas están a punto de desaparecer por el gran consumo de carbono que una pequeña élite de la humanidad en un pequeño número de países está haciendo crecer sin tener en cuenta la existencia, la vida en el planeta Tierra. Gracias, muy amable.
Thank you, President Petro. That was truly wonderful. Thank you for outlining the complexity of what we are trying to do, as well as the absolute necessity of what we need to do. Thank you so much. It's hard to follow that, but I know if you have been looking at your watches that we are unfortunately out of time. And I know that there are many of you that had burning questions in the audience that you wanted to ask, particularly from the media. What I would ask is for those of you from the media that would like to ask questions of any of the heads of state here, that you could please identify yourselves to our comms team. If our comms team could wave their hands, please. There's Ziona at the back, and there is Rika in black waving. If you could please and Vivi, yes. If you could please keep waving, and if you could make your way there and please let them know what your question is, and we'll try to organize that. I can see your hand, but unfortunately I do have to close the event. I do apologize, and apologize again for our late start and for your patience. Thank you to everyone. This has been a truly momentous occasion. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm sure you will agree that this has been a historic moment in the journey towards securing a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. Special thanks to our distinguished guests. Thank you once again. Your leadership has galvanized us all, and I know that there are many more leaders in the audience. Please, we'd love you to come and endorse the treaty. Please join us to ensure a fossil-free future and the safety of our people and planet. Thank you very much.